So I'm JB. It's lovely to have you here with me for this How to Be a Media Spokesperson webinar. Throughout the webinar, please do use the chat and get in touch with me. I'd love any questions that you have along the way. Please do chuck them in. I love to tailor training sessions and make sure that people get information and support that is specific to them. So if you have any questions, please do let me know, pop them in the chat or send me an email and I can help out along the way. Let's start with a bit of an intro. This is me, I'm JB. I've been working in broadcasting and media training for nearly 20 years now. I started when I was 17 years old at a community radio station in Adelaide called Radio Adelaide. And what you have here is a picture of me with my grandpa, who was the one who gave me the bug. Grandpa was the one that introduced me to community radio at his local radio station in Horsham, Triple H. And I picked up that bug and ran with it. I've been doing broadcasting and media ever since, and it's been a huge part of my life. It's really lovely to look at this photo and see my grandpa's face and the fun that we had together sharing broadcasting as our shared joy, our thing that we did together and were able to share. So that was really sweet. From there, I then went into teaching broadcasting quite heavily. I became the education and training manager at SYN Media, which is a youth media organisation based in Melbourne. And SYN was a fantastic experience. We trained thousands of young people in media each year. And a lot of them are now out there in the media, which is really cool to see. It's really fantastic to see so many talented people go into great jobs and things throughout the media industry. So SYN was that for me. It was a really great early career experience as a media trainer. And then I jumped into not being on the media side myself, not as a broadcaster, but as a spokesperson. So in the community legal sector, in the consumer advocacy sector, I became one of the lead spokespeople. So in my time, particularly at Consumer Advocate Choice, I did hundreds of media interviews over the years that I was there, and everything from silly segments talking about coffee machine reviews and having Carl Stefanovic break the coffee machines and spill coffee everywhere, through to really serious policy discussions about insurance or finance law and advocating for change on things like product safety and children's product safety. So I've done everything from the fun and the frivolous to the quite serious. And it's been a really fun journey for me. So I've done a bit of the being the broadcaster, being the interviewer, and a bit of the being the spokesperson along the way. It's been a really fun ride for me, and I'm really glad that I get to teach people what it's all about and go through that process myself. Now, media training. This is what I do. I help people prepare for the media, most recently working with young climate scientists, which was just such a wonderful, wonderful experience, taking people who are just so talented and good at what they do and helping them share their work has been such a joy over the last couple of years. So it's really nice to be able to bring that experience. Now, because I have worked over so many topics and so many different kinds of work as a spokesperson, as a media trainer, I'd love to hear in the chat what it is that you're interested in and what you would love to learn and anything specific along the way. So please do jump in the chat and let me know if there's anything that you would like to know. But let's get started into the main tips as a media spokesperson. And really, the biggest thing is that media is a conversation. That's what we're looking for when you're a journalist or a broadcaster. You're looking for a good conversation to help tell your story. So really the key is great conversation. Make sure that you are having a great conversation with the audience and with the journalist or the broadcaster who is in front of you. So I know one of the things that often comes up is people feel pressured that they have to retain all of the knowledge of their expertise, that you have to memorize every fact, figure, thing about that topic so that you don't get caught out. But in most media spokesperson circumstances, you don't actually need to be the encyclopedia of knowledge. People aren't there to learn every single fact and figure from you. They want to get to know you as a person and as an expert. So they want to feel comfortable with you. So conversation really, really is key. And think about being a spokesperson as an advertisement to help people get to know more. So your conversation, the interview that you're a part of, you're teasing people to then go check out your website, to go and read more, to learn more about the topic. They don't need to learn it all in that one interview. So I'll really stress that you don't have to be the encyclopedia of knowledge of your topic in every interview. So don't worry about trying to keep absolutely everything in your head. There are three main types of media comments. We've got news grabs, pre-recorded interviews, and live interviews. So there's a bit of delineation between these three types, and I'll take you through each one so that you can get a sense of just exactly what the difference is and what, in terms of your skills, you need to be able to adapt to. Let's start with the first one. This has little baby-faced JB. This would have been one of my first media performances doing news grabs to the Consumer Action Law Centre in Victoria. Now, news grabs, they're very short. They are all about short, sharp, snappy. You might speak to a journalist for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then when you watch the news that night, they only use 5 seconds of it. And that is totally okay. That is normal in this format, because particularly when it comes to television news, for radio news, they're doing these shorter bulletins, these shorter stories that need to capture people's attention. But it is worth doing because these are some of the highest rated programs in the country. So it's important to keep that in mind, that while you might speak to a journalist for 10, 15, 20 minutes and only see yourself on air for 5 seconds, some of the most eyeballs in the country are going on those news programs. So news grabs really can be worth it. They do expose you to quite large audiences. Let's go through some specific tips for news grabs. One of the most important in this style is about repeating the question back into your answer. And the reason that you have to do this is so that when the journalist goes back to edit their story that night, they don't have to have their question in the story. They want to be able to use a self-contained part of your answer without needing to include their question. So we'll go through some examples of that later on. We also, in news grabs, want you to give options. So the thing about news grabs is they are pre-recorded. So you can give 3 different variations of the same line when you are speaking to a news journalist. And actually, they'll appreciate it, because if you give them more options in the edit suite when they get back, it makes it easier for them to put their story together. Now, don't worry too much about journalists being this big, scary thing that are out to get you, because for probably 90% of news grabs and this style of media, the journalist actually wants your expertise. They actually want you to thrive. They want you to survive, they want you to succeed, not just survive in your story. They want you to sound the best that you can be so that they get the best story on air that night. So it's okay to give them options. And you can even say to a news journalist, hey, I think I can phrase that a bit better. Can I go again? That's totally fine. Most of us aren't politicians where they're trying to capture the gotcha moment. Most of the time, journalists are more than happy to give you another go so that they can put together a better story that night. Then, I really stress this for people who particularly have been involved in policy work or deep scientific work. There's sometimes this pressure where you feel you have to be very professional, very rational, and not show any emotion. But in news media, you've got to capture people's attention. And news journalists need a bit of ebb and flow. So it's totally okay to have a bit of emotion. It's, in fact, important to show a bit of emotion. You're allowed to say it's really important that the government does this because families are hurting, or we really need this change for this reason, and I'm really excited to see this change. It's okay to put in some of that emotion and that passion, because that's going to bring the audience on board with you. So I'm just going to pop into the comments before we go into this next one. Alex from NASCAR has joined us. She trains colleagues in how to do media interviews, so looking to brush up on those training skills and discover tips she can use herself. Thanks for joining, Alex. Anyone else, feel free to jump in the comments and any questions that you have along the way. It's nice to have NASCAR, the National Aboriginal Sporting Chants Academy, represented here. So I can see a couple of people joining in. We're going through news grabs, which is the very, very short 5, 10, 15-second grabs that you see on television news at night. We're going to have a little bit of practice. So some of you might be in your offices. If you don't have a private space, you might want to quietly try this out for yourself. But this is a really important skill to master as part of doing news grabs. So when I say rephrasing the question into your answer, what I mean is providing context. So your answer shouldn't just be a one-word yes, no, or the number that they've asked for. You need to give full context to the question. So if you can, and as a media spokesperson, you've got to get practiced with speaking and getting out of your comfort zone. So I'm going to put some questions up on the screen, and I want you to actually practice answering them out loud if you do have a private space during this webinar. If you don't, maybe a little bit of a quiet whisper to yourself. We're going to go pretty simple to start. What did you have for breakfast this morning? That's all I want to know. I will give you a chance. I want you to actually vocalize it and get it out, but you need to phrase that question back into your answer. What did you have for breakfast this morning? Okay, I'm going to give you an example of what I mean when rephrasing, and let's see how you went with your answer. So if you're answering, what did I have for breakfast this morning, and you just answer Wheat Bix, then you've only given 2 words that the journalist can use in a news story. And that's really hard for them to edit in. So rephrasing the question back into your answer looks something like, this morning I had Wheat Bix for breakfast. I added a bit of banana and honey. It's one of my daily go-to meals. It's okay to add just a little bit extra to your answers, but make sure that you're not giving those curt, simple, 1-word or 2-word answers. You need to incorporate that question back into your answer. Let's have another go at a different one. What was the weather like yesterday? So have a think. How might you incorporate that into your answer? All right, I've got another example for you of how you might answer that. Incorporating that question into your answer might be saying, in Melbourne yesterday, the weather was 25 degrees with some light showers, which is above average for this time of year. So we're making sure that we include the city. We're making sure that we reference that the question was about the weather. And this answer could be edited out of context and used by the journalist much more easily. If you just say 25 degrees, unfortunately, that makes it really hard for the journalist to be able to use your answer. All right, and I can see we've got more people coming in. Feel free to jump into the chat and say hello, introduce yourself. I'm JB, I'm your trainer for today. And I really love to tailor sessions to people's individual questions. So please do jump in with any questions along the way. I would really love to hear from you and to be able to answer your specific questions as a media spokesperson. All right, final practice round for doing a news grab. Should the government introduce a law for free daily chocolate bars? Now, again, if you've got a private space, it's a bit more comfortable answering these questions. How would you phrase this back in? Okay, here we go again. Another example, of course, if you just say yes, that doesn't give the journalist much to work with. But incorporating that question back into your answer, you would say, the government should introduce a law for free daily chocolate bars because it'll increase our chances of winning a golden ticket from Willy Wonka. Of course. So that's really important with news grabs and a skill to practice. So something you can do with colleagues, you can do with friends and family to practice skills, particularly for news, is getting used to recontextualizing in the answers that you give to people. So that's one recommendation I have for you is have practice conversations with people that you trust and practice this process of putting the question into your answer, just providing that little bit of extra context. All right, we're going to move on to our next type, but I can see we've had a few more people jump in. We are going through types of media comment. We've started with news grabs. We're moving on to pre-recorded interviews in a moment and live interviews next. Feel free to jump in the comments. I can see Katrina has jumped in. Thanks, Katrina, from Super Consumers Australia, an organization I know very well. Nice to have you here. Let's move on to our next type of media, and that's pre-recorded interviews. So the difference between news grabs and pre-recorded interviews is pre-recorded interviews are typically longer and the journalist has a bigger picture for the story that you are in. So you need to think a little bit deeper here about what it is that you're providing to the bigger story. They want to be able to use more than just the 5-10 seconds that you see on TV news. You're an integral part of their story. And I always come back to, with these ones, all stories need a beginning, a middle, and an end. And coming back to that is going to help you in most media circumstances to make sure that you provide a holistic experience to the audience and to the interviewer, is if you have in your mind a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you're helping the journalist and really collaborating with the journalist to make sure that they can flesh out and fill out this full structure. So here are some tips for pre-recorded interviews. Collaboration. One, I call this collaborative storytelling because you are collaborating with the journalist or the producer. So find out what the story is. It's actually okay to speak to the journalist or producer beforehand and find out what is the angle for this bigger story? What is it that you've uncovered? What is it that's going on here? And what kind of expertise are you trying to get out of me? Am I the context setter in the story? Do I explain how the laws used to work in this context? Or am I the future part of the story? Am I meant to give people ideas for the future? Am I meant to help people imagine what a different future looks like? The journalist will have an idea of the story they're putting together, and they want options to make that into a fully fleshed story that will serve their audience. So be their collaborator and be comfortable saying no. If you find out what their story angle is and you go, oh, I actually think there's someone better who can cover this. Don't feel pressured like you have to do media purely because it's been offered, because your organization, your brand needs the exposure. Sometimes it is best to just go, no, I think maybe I'm not quite the fit for this one. And that's totally okay. But that's also an opportunity to pass it on to someone else who is. So If you know someone else in your industry who can help this journalist, keep up that relationship and offer them someone who does fit that, or offer them an alternative to the angle that they have. So you can always offer something different. You can say to the journalist or the producer, oh, look, I don't really cover this, but what if we covered this as part of the story? And as a collaborator, a genuine collaborator with the journalist or the producer, you can have a real impact in actually shaping a story to be better. And the journalists and the producers, ultimately, that's what they want. They want the best story for their audiences. Now, I'm going to keep coming back to this. It's the concept of refining 3 clear messages. Now, I say 3 clear messages can work in a 2-minute interview, a 20-minute interview, or an hour-long interview. It's about having your 3 goals in mind, your 3 messages in mind the whole time throughout that interview, so that if you get lost, if you come off the path that you've planned, you have somewhere to come back to. It's just like getting on the road. You know, you've got your 3 stops along the way, but you want to go and explore. You want to go and see that nice bakery that someone told you about. But so long as you've got those stops to come back to and you know your overall path, that's what your 3 clear messages are for. So particularly, I really discourage people from trying to memorize a speech or recite word for word, because coming back to the start, media is conversational, and what journalists and what audiences are looking for is a genuine conversation with you. And if you're desperately trying to remember exactly word for word what you'd written in preparation, it leaves you unprepared for real conversation. So do keep that in mind along the way. And then for the final tip, in these pre-recorded interviews, you have the opportunity to tell bigger stories. So try to have examples that you can include. These can be first-person ones. These can be stories you've heard from other people, particularly if you're working in a campaigning or a social context. This is where you can talk about, oh, I met a family the other day and they were telling me that their washing machine broke down and the only way that they could afford to get it fixed was to go without meals for a couple of days. You know, you can tell those stories as part of an interview. You can incorporate those stories, and those are really powerful, whether they're your own story, whether you're telling them secondhand. This is your opportunity to tell bigger stories and bring in a bit of a bigger narrative. For a sillier one that I've used in the past, so I once did coffee machine reviews and coffee reviews with the Today Show. And for coffee, all I could think about was my dad with his love of instant coffee and Nescafe. And so to bring a bit of lightness to the segment, I brought up my dad's love of instant coffee and my memories sitting on the back porch with my dad and his really dodgy instant coffee. I built that picture for the audience because it's something a lot of people can relate to, and it just adds a bit of light. So you can use these stories to add anecdotal evidence to a campaign or something social, or you can use it in lighter topics to just make it a bit more fun, to add a bit of humanity to what you're talking about. So feel free to add stories like that. Again, feel free to jump any comments in along the way. We have covered news grabs, onto pre-recorded interviews, and now we're going to go to the big, scary one. I promise it's not that scary once you've done it a couple of times, but I totally understand people's fear. Live interviews. Whew. It's the big one, and I know that it is the one that, you know, you look at and you go, oh, I've got to do a live interview. I've got no safety net. What do I do? I'm here to promise you that journalists, broadcasters, they are with you. They don't want you to have a bad live interview. They want to have a good conversation, and the audience, they want the audience to love you. So we often think of those big politician interviews where they are aiming for that gotcha moment. They're really trying to catch the politician out on saying something wrong or doing something wrong. that is not the majority of live interviews. So you don't need to worry about that as much as you think. What the journalist or the broadcaster wants is a good conversation. That is their priority. They want the audience to stay engaged, and they want people to feel like they are part of the conversation. So don't think about live interviews as though you're speaking to hundreds or thousands or millions of people. You're having a one-on-one conversation. And if you think about it as a one-on-one conversation, it can take away a lot of that stress. And it helps you to actually speak in a more refined way that speaks to that direct person that you want to reach out to the most. So let's have a look at some of the things you can do in live interview contexts to thrive, not just survive in a live interview. So broadcasters, they're always going to prioritize good conversation. So they're the surrogate for the listener or the viewer, and they're always going to turn to what they think the audience wants, not what you want. So one of the reasons why I don't suggest people go into interviews with a fully planned out script of everything they're going to say is it's very normal for broadcasters and journalists to go with what the most interesting conversation is, not necessarily what was planned. So you might speak to a journalist or a producer beforehand and they go, this is what the conversation is going to be. But unfortunately, the producer and the presenter can have completely different ideas in their minds, and you need to be prepared for that fact. And that's actually what a good interviewer does, is they follow a natural flow of conversation. And actually, it's a good thing. If you've said something really interesting, if the interviewer is listening and they're picking up on exactly what you're saying, they will divert to that interesting thing you've said. If they're truly listening, they should divert into the most interesting part of conversation, because that's the normal, natural flow of conversations that you have with your friends, your family, is that you might divert. If someone says something really interesting, you go into that topic for a while. Again, I come back to 3 clear, refined messages. So it's the same with pre-recorded interviews. It's the same with news grabs. It's the same with live interviews. You want that as a guide to help you along the way. And it really, really is important to have your goals down pat. We will come back to planning your goals, talking about your goals along the way. And then the final one is be yourself. You don't have to be someone else. I like to think of live interviews as maybe being a slightly more polished version of yourself. You might improve your posture a bit more. You might fix up your hair a bit more than you otherwise would. You might wear one of your fancy shirts, but actually your comfort is really important. So don't feel like you have to put on a voice or feel that you have to be this character. It's okay to be yourself. In fact, that is what journalists, broadcasters, audiences want. They want authentic people, and your personality, who you are, is what gets people to take that next step of learning more about your research or your work or the campaign that you're working on. So do see yourself as the strength in this scenario. It's really important in this environment of media interviews to bring yourself into it, because people pick up on inauthenticity really easily. We have a question from NASCAR, the National Aboriginal Sporting Chance Academy. How would you tackle a question in a live interview that you didn't know the answer to, asking for specific stats or facts? This is an interesting one. So I guess the key thing here is keeping in mind that journalists do want the best conversation, and it's actually not in a journalist or a broadcaster's best interests to have you completely thrown off. So if you get a question about something that you genuinely do not know the answer to, you can come back to your messages. You don't necessarily have to answer that specific question. So if you're a polite person, you want to answer the question that's been asked to you, but it's about pivoting. There's a few ways you can pivot. You can refer to colleagues or other research. If you have knowledge of the field in a general sense, and you can say, oh, well, actually, there's some really interesting research being done into this issue by this person, and they're doing some really great work here. But what we're focused on is coming back to your message and what you do know. You don't have to let it stop the conversation completely. You can refer to other people's knowledge, or you can make sure that you come back to your messages. And it doesn't have to be, like doing a U-turn in the car to come back to your messages. It can just be going, genuinely accepting that that's a really interesting question that they've asked, that you don't necessarily know the answer to that, but you can steer things back to a direction that you're more comfortable with. So thanks for that question, Alex from NASCAR. All right, so we are going to do our next practice bit, particularly when it comes to being authentic as a media spokesperson. You've got to get yourself comfortable. So for this next little bit, again, I apologize if you are in a public office or a public space. You might do a quiet version of this or a little bit of a version in your head. But one of the best things you can learn as a media spokesperson is vocal practices. So if you've ever been in a choir, if you've ever been in music or singing, you'll know what this is like. But if you have not, it is certainly fun. So what happens when you are speaking publicly is every single part of your body impacts how your voice sounds. So if you're hunched over and you're nervous, it impacts the authority in your voice and your ability for people to feel comfortable and confident with you. So I'm actually going to stand up and just shake out, because you need your body to be in a good, comfortable place. So make sure that you shake out and that you get your nerves out in whatever way works for you. Whenever I go to a media interview, often I'm in the car beforehand. I'll put on some of my favorite music and use that to warm up my voice. But there are also techniques that singers use. And please do, if you know some, use ones that you're comfortable with. But also make sure that you have these ready to go. So I'm going to do one for you here, an old singer's trick, which is to do a bit of a bubble with your lips, which is a bit like a car. And what this does is it loosens up your lips and the muscles around your face so that your voice is warm and can, be the best it can be. So we go, it's something singers do, and then they go through different notes. So again, if you're in an office and you've got people around you, you may not want to do this right now. But if you are in a quiet space, I do recommend giving it a shot. This is really important as a media spokesperson, just to get the muscles and your body prepared. So that's just one example of a vocal technique. Do give it a shot. Make sure that you do some kind of warm up before you do get into a situation as a media spokesperson, because it's going to make a huge difference to the quality of your voice. Look up some different vocal warm-ups and give that a shot. All right, here is the practical process of actually preparing and writing down those media lines. So there are a lot of schools of thought as to what is the best way to do this. As I mentioned earlier, it can be tempting to go, I'm going to write down every single word that I'm going to say, and then I'm going to try and remember it. Here's my process for preparing for media. So it's really important to define a good goal. Don't be really, really broad with this. So often it comes up the concept of awareness. We're doing media because of awareness. We want awareness for our brand, awareness for our cause. But in terms of as a spokesperson, awareness isn't a goal that really helps you to reach out to an audience. It's too broad. So what specifically do you want? Do you want website visitors, a law changed, behavior change in the community? Be really specific about that. Then once you've got a good goal, make sure that you picture your audience and picture them as one person. Who is the one person that can help you achieve that goal? So if you want a law changed, maybe it's the minister who is in charge of that area of the government. Or maybe you want a business to stop doing something dodgy. Picture the CEO of that company and think, okay, if the CEO of that company or that government minister is watching this interview, what can I say to make them change their mind, change that law, do that thing, and think about how you're going to speak to them directly and achieve your goal. And once again, I've said it a few times, I like to refine down to 3 key messages, but writing those 3 key messages really needs to come from a strong goal and a strong understanding of your audience. So always, always, always have a good goal, come to your audience, and then refine down those 3 messages. All right, so those who signed up through Humanitix, you should have received over email one of these media lines templates. And you can download one of these from the QR code if you've joined us from somewhere else. But we're going to go through the process of filling out some media lines. So please take a moment. There's a QR code on screen that will take you directly to the download. Or those who got tickets in advance, you should have a copy in your emails. And once again, feel free, jump on in to the chat if you have any questions along the way. And we'll go through the process of actually preparing those lines for media. All right, let's fill out one of these templates. So the structure here is all about trying to get you to think, how do you want the audience to act or react? Now, as I just mentioned, you want to think of the person who can achieve what you want to achieve. So when you're filling out these media lines, you want a really clear topic, goal, and audience. So the topic here, filling out this top section of the structure, is really about this document being good enough that someone else, maybe someone else in your organization, another spokesperson, could take this document because you've gotten sick, you've lost your voice, they need to take over the interview that you've done. Your preparation should be good enough that someone else can quickly look at this document and go, okay, I can handle this. I know what the plan was for this interview. So simple explanation of the topic, a really specific goal, and a description of the audience, trying to refine down to one person that really is going to make difference here. So the example topic I've picked is why everyone should eat more honey. So I'm a honey industry bigwig. I'm trying to sell as much honey to the community as possible. And my goal, it's pretty direct. It's to boost the sales of honey. But my audience is really specific. I have done some research and I've found out that actually there's a huge, huge market opportunity to get to parents, the ones who are making the school sandwiches, the parents who are in the supermarket and they're deciding between Nutella, they're deciding between celery for the kids. Now, we're going to get them to buy honey instead. So, going a bit deeper into this, here's how we come to the 3 messages. So I like to use a structure that goes from beginning to middle to end. A simple story structure that helps me refine that I've got 3 really strong messages that meet my goal, but across an interview do tell a story. Or another way of looking at it is the past, the present, the future. So I've got my goals, why everyone should eat more honey. I'm trying to get a boost in the sales of honey. And my target audience is parents, the ones who are making the school sandwiches in the morning. I'm trying to get them to buy honey. So my first message, I want to start with the beginning, a bit of the past, and this is all about setting the tone. In this case, I'm trying to evoke, as the CEO of the Honey Council, I'm trying to evoke people's memories of a better past, where grandma used to make honey sandwiches, and evoke images in people's minds, smells in people's mind that give them a really positive association with honey. So my first message is about evoking memory of honey sweets from childhood, because my audience is parents, those parents who are going to make those school sandwiches. So I need to take them back in their minds to those good old days when grandma was making honey treats. And so in my message, I'm using a honey recipe book to get this across and to get people interested. Then as I move on to my second message, why does the audience care right now? Why is it relevant? Why is it important? Why should they act right now? So in my second message, I'm making it topical. I'm saying, it's so hard for parents to make good choices and good school lunches that kids will actually eat, but it's win-win using more honey. You know, you get to support the local bees in your environment and your kids will love it. So bringing people into the now and just making it seem like choosing honey, so much easier, so much easier. And then to end, what do I actually want the audience to do? And this is coming back to, how do you get the audience to act or react? And in this case, my third message is really simple. Download our free honey recipe book and share what you've made with us. And that's all about making it easy for my audience of young parents. Oh, these people have made it super easy for me to jump in and use honey every day. That makes it so much of an easier decision when I'm in the supermarket to go and buy some honey. So do keep that in mind, that I've created a really specific audience here, that everything has been tailored to that parent. And I'm picturing one parent. I'm picturing them at the supermarket. I'm picturing them in the car listening to this radio interview, and they're literally on their way to the supermarket deciding what to buy. My interview comes on their local radio station, and I have spoken directly to them to convince them to go and buy some honey. So that's why it's so important to have your goals and your audience down pat before you write any of these messages. Again, feel free to jump into any of the comments and ask any specific questions that you have about using a template like this or preparing these lines. Now, when you write these lines, yes, you do want to remember them, but try not to worry too much about remembering your lines specifically word by word. If you have your strong goals, if you have your strong audience, and you know what those 3 messages are, generally, you'll be able to get through almost any interview, whether it's 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour. So make sure that you have those goals and messages really clear, but don't worry about trying to remember a script of those exact lines. There might be cases, there are always cases to the exception where, say, for example, you're dealing in a really legally tricky area where, yes, you do have to remember some specific wording, but for most cases, we want to retain the conversation. We want to keep that conversational tone. All right. Let's go through some of the technical tips when you're in these situations. So we've covered the different types of interviews, and these are relevant across TV, radio, and others. But let's have a look at some of the specific technicalities. So if you're on radio and podcast, you really got to make sure that your phone and internet connection is strong. Make sure that you are doing tests, that you know that your mobile connection is good in that part of the house. That stuff is really important. Things like your AirPods, you might find that the audio quality of them isn't very good, and you actually have to use the handset itself, because your AirPods or your Bluetooth headset reduces the quality of your sound. Even when you're on radio and people can't see you, your posture can affect you. And this is one of the issues with scripts, is that often people will have their script, and even if they're on radio and doing a radio interview, they're tempted to look down and read from their script while they're doing their radio interview. And looking down like this actually restricts your airway. So if you're on the phone and doing a radio interview, it's really important to make sure that you do actually think about your posture. And again, coming back to things like doing those vocal warm-ups along the way, getting your body relaxed. It's important to make sure you are in a relaxed frame of mind. For television, you want to avoid clothes with tight patterns or distracting elements. So say, for example, a checkered shirt or anything with really fine lines, that can cause strobing on television sets. And so they'll typically tell you to avoid that. TV lights can make you look quite ghostly. So whether you're a person who normally wears makeup or not, it can be helpful to have a couple of things to just lighten the color of your skin a bit, in terms of adding a bit of color again, because those bright lights will remove some color. So one thing I actually use is a tinted moisturizer when I'm on TV. This is particularly, if you're on a live TV show on a commercial TV station, they actually do have makeup teams, and they will put makeup on you. They'll fix up your hair. On some smaller public broadcasters, they probably won't have a makeup team, but something as simple as a tinted moisturizer or a simple powder can just bring a little bit of color back to your face. Pardon me. Avoid loud and clanky jewelry. So actually, I'm using one right now. You can see that I've got a lapel microphone that's providing the sound for this. If I was wearing a loud, clanky necklace, there's a strong chance that would be banging up against the microphone and causing a bit of noise. So do watch for anything loud and clanky. And then when you're in studio, focus on the interviewer and ignore the cameras. The only circumstance where you look into the camera is when you are doing, say, a satellite cross or a Zoom interview. So right now, when I'm speaking to you, I'm speaking directly into the lens of the camera. And when you're doing one of those interviews, that is the satellite cross or over Zoom, you're looking directly into the camera. But in those other environments, you need to not look at it at all. You just need to look at the person interviewing you and engage in that conversation. So in studio, focus on the person interviewing you and try to forget that the cameras exist. If you're out of studio doing a live cross where you're just with a camera, you just keep your eyes on that camera and stay focused on that. And then for print and online media, it's really important to assume that everything you say is on the record. So if I got a call from a journalist right now about something, often they'll jump into the conversation very quick. Oh, what's your thoughts on blah? And you think you're having a normal conversation. What you don't realize is that they're already mining you for content. So if a journalist calls you up, just be conscious that, particularly with print and online journalists, what you say is on the record straight away, unless you explicitly say that it is off the record. If you're providing a written quote, and sometimes you do get the opportunity to do that, to just send some thoughts over email, make sure that you're writing as you would speak. So it's important, if you're providing quotes, to read them out aloud back to yourself and make sure that they sound like spoken language. Because a quote is meant to be a quote of something a person has said. If it reads like written language, it's not really a quote. So whenever you write something, in fact, whenever you write any of these media lines, do any of this, make sure that you read it out aloud to yourself. That's really, really important. All right. Dealing with the unexpected. Thanks again, Alex from NASCAR, for asking before about not knowing the answer. The kinds of sentences I was using before to explain that are called bridging sentences. So there's ways of getting yourself out of a question that can help you just more calmly in a natural flow of conversation, just shift direction a little bit. I do really want to stress that journalists are actually on your side and they want to have a good conversation with you. So they don't want to see you scared or flailing, or they actually want to have good conversations. So if they ask you a question you don't know, most of the time, they're actually happy if you do divert to something else. Provided that you're not a politician, if you're diverting to a better conversation and a better line of conversation, most broadcasters and journalists are happy, provided that their audience is learning something or their audience is entertained. It's okay if you don't have the answer to that specific question right then and there. So a few ways to get around that is bridging sentences are examples like, oh, that's a really interesting question, but what our research focused on was da, 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 da. Or, as I mentioned before, referring to other people's expertise, other people in the sector that you trust. So, oh yeah, economists have done some really interesting work on this, but what we focused on is the environmental impact, and what the environmental impact shows is etc. So you want to be able to use those bridging sentences and have a few of those small phrases in your mind that just help you divert. But also just remember, you can slow down and stop for a second. You can stop in a longer interview particularly and go, oh yeah, no, I hadn't considered that. That's a really interesting question that you've raised. And a lot of things are really important in what you've raised. I'll have to come back to that and really have a think. But our research then went to this, it's okay to stop and think and ponder for a moment. Interviews can go really fast and they can feel really like on. You can feel like you have to keep up a pace, but it is actually okay to stop and think for a moment and go, oh yeah, that's a really interesting point. You can take your time. And in fact, most people need to slow down a little bit. Most people need to lose about 5% of their speed when they get into these situations. My final point here, final couple of points, is go with it. So if the interviewer is taking a different path, but it is within your expertise, look, that's your opportunity to test some new messages and learn what interviewers and audiences are interested in. So often when I was working with Choice or in the Consumer Law Centre, is I would find that the more I did interviews about the same topic, the interviews would teach me what people were interested in and wanted to know. And that was my chance to adapt my messaging every time that I got an interview. I learned a little bit more about the types of questions that could come up. So the more you practice, the more you learn about what people want to know. So again, I'll come back to media trying to entertain and inform. It's okay if interviews go in a different direction. That's how normal human conversation works. And sometimes, actually, you might find better new messages by following the conversation where it naturally leads. So don't be afraid to experiment a little bit in your messaging when you're a media spokesperson. And then the final one, which is probably the scary one, is, are they argumentative? So the vast majority of media interviews media just want a good conversation with you. They'll sometimes play devil's advocate. You will find that they'll put words in your mouth. They will ask you, isn't it shocking that the government's doing this? And it's clear that they want you to say, it's shocking that the government is doing this. You don't have to bite. It's okay. In those cases, you just don't have to answer the question. You can focus on that's where your messages can really help, is when you've got an argumentative case, but also you can be yourself. There are circumstances where I've been with shock jocks who have tried to defend a really awful industry or a really awful company. And I've just come back to them and said, well, of course, that's what the industry would say. Of course, that's the position of the industry. Sometimes you can diffuse with just holding back a little bit, not biting, but just being strong in what you're standing for. All right, so Katrina, I can see that you've asked about worrying about waffling or going blank. Do you have any tips for handling nerves? That is a good one. So in terms of handling nerves, there are a few things. I mean, obviously be conscious of stimulants and coffee and anything in your system before an interview that's going to make you feel more nervous than you already are. So this is something I have to watch, is whenever I've done breakfast media on radio or television, I have to remind myself not to have too many coffees before I go in, and try to limit myself just to one before I get into the interview. But that's just something to be conscious of, is, the things that normally might overstimulate you can be part of it as well. In terms of waffling or going blank, I would say the biggest thing that helps there is having practice interviews with people you trust. So whether it's a colleague, whether it's a friend, often family members or friends who actually don't know the topic at all are the best ones to practice with, because they will tell you if they have no idea what you're talking about. They'll be the most blunt if they don't understand what you're saying. And you actually need that before you get into the interview scenarios. And you need kind-hearted friends and family to help remind you where maybe you are waffling or where you are going a little bit off. That's where friends and family are really important. In your workplace, that can get tricky because you're working with people who know the topic, and they often are really invested in the detail. And sometimes your workplace can accidentally encourage you to waffle because everyone is so invested in the topic and the detail. So try and get some friends, some people you can practice with, that just help you manage those nerves before you get into an interview situation. And that will really help you along the way. All right, thanks for that one, Katrina. Now, I'm conscious that we've had an hour, and I really want to thank you for joining me for this session. For the last half hour, I'm going to keep a really loose structure to the session where we can look at filling out one of those media lines templates off of either a topic that you're interested in. So feel free to go into the chat and suggest a topic that you'd like some help doing media lines with. But otherwise, I'm going to give a 5-minute break so that you can get a water, cup of tea, anything like that. If you can't make it back, I will just say thank you for joining. I am doing some training courses in Melbourne for scientists and researchers on Tuesday, the 3rd of December, policy experts and campaigners on the Wednesday, the 4th of December, and a general full-day practical on Tuesday, the 10th of December. I am adding a Black Friday-ish discount this week for these courses in Melbourne. Just use Comms Friday at the checkout. Otherwise, I'm going to have a quick 5-minute break for you. I am staying here, so feel free to keep coming in the chat, but I will give you a moment to get a cup of tea, some water, and come back. And for the last half hour, we will go through an actual practice case of preparing media lines live. So we'll come back in 5 minutes. Any questions while we relax in this 5 minutes, feel free to pop them in the chat. Thanks, Katrina. Really nice to have you with, and great questions too. Hope it was helpful along the way. Anyone else who has any questions, feel free to pop them in while we're actually taking 5. Anyone else who is still watching, now you may have seen this on a couple of my social media channels, but this is a really fun present that I received from a few of my former colleagues. This was a TV segment I did live on the Today Show. And if you see here, you can see Karl Stefanovic is kind of this big blur behind me. And I was doing coffee machine reviews on the Today Show, and Karl did this kind of amazing, let's just call it a character, where he pretended that he'd had too many coffees that day. And then he proceeded to go ahead and break all of the coffee machines that we were reviewing, spill coffee everywhere. One of the most chaotic experiences that I've had. And my old colleagues, when I left that last job, put it onto a mug for me and immortalized it. Pretty great gift. All right. I can see there are a couple of you. If you're ready to go, feel free to pop something in the chat, or otherwise I will just get started on doing a practice run of writing some media lines. And thank you so much for joining. Those of you who are here, have been here. All right. Now, I can't see specifically who's dropped in and dropped out. So if someone new has come in, we're just taking a short break and we will come back in a moment and prepare some live media lines on a random topic. We're going to give it a shot. Thank you for all the questions in the comments. All right. Someone new in. Hello, I'm JB. Thanks for joining for the How to Be a Media Spokesperson training session. We're just about to do some practical media lines writing. And I think we'll jump back into that. So, prepping for news. What we're going to do in this last little section is take a news story that's actually happening today and see if we can write some media lines about it. Now, if there is a news story from today to test me out on, please do feel free to chuck any suggestions in the comments. I've brought up the latest on the ABC News website, and we can see quite a few different stories around here. Feel free to chuck in the comments any suggestions that you have. But my leaning, I reckon let's go with this Bunnings story. Bunnings breached privacy laws by using facial recognition on customers. Commissioner fines. So if we look at the base of the story, and this is really nice about the ABC's current news design, is it gives this really nice summary, which in a lot of ways is kind of a media lines summary that can help you with an interview. So in short, Bunnings has interfered with the privacy of hundreds of thousands of customers by using facial recognition technology without gaining proper consent, the Privacy Commissioner has ruled. The retail giant says the technology was used to protect staff and organised from increasing exposure to violent and organised crime. What's next? The commissioner has ordered Bunnings not to repeat the behaviour and to destroy all personal information collected. Bunnings will seek a review of the ruling. All right, let's have a crack at turning this story into some media lines. So coming to our template, I think what will work really well here is being a digital rights, privacy rights advocate. So I'm a privacy rights advocate and I want new laws to protect people from facial recognition. Now, as I'm going through this, jump in, feel free to come in with any suggestions. If you want me to try a different audience or a different goal, we can do this together, have a crack. Otherwise, I will go through and explain how I go through the process of preparing media lines. In terms of a goal, I want the Prime Minister to introduce new facial recognition laws. And in terms of my audience, I'm actually going to list the Prime Minister. And thank you, NASCA, for joining us for the webinar. Appreciate your time. Okay, so the audience here is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the person with the power to get these laws done. So what I've got to think through is I need new law. I want better privacy for people who've been through this scenario with Bunnings. Utilizing the structure, which if I come back to, going from the beginning, the middle, the end, or the past, present, and future. What's the context I want to set here? So I think in terms of the past, as a privacy advocate, I want to remind people what happens when our privacy isn't protected. So we could talk about the past. We can talk and set a context that helps the audience understand why this issue is important. So particularly we could, for example, I'm a privacy advocate. I'm trying to reach out to the Prime Minister. What does the Prime Minister care about? The Prime Minister cares about politics. And if they want to get these laws up, maybe I need to give the Prime Minister a positive sense of laws that have worked well. So maybe my first message could be, we have really great laws that protect people through something like the Australian consumer law. So we could say there are really great laws that protect us in this, but they haven't kept up. We can use consumer law as the base for new privacy laws. So here in this case, because I'm thinking through the audience of the Prime Minister, that one person who really can make this legal change happen for me, I go, okay, I need some kind of a positive feel to get the Prime Minister to think, oh, this is a good idea that's worth picking up on. Okay, now we're talking the present as a second message. So what's going to make the Prime Minister care? So we could look at, for example, maybe I have examples of Bunnings staff members and customers. I could use a case study or an example from some former Bunnings staff members or customers. So maybe I go to a Bunnings and actually speak to some people and find out, how do you feel about this facial recognition? I could say that people were shocked that their faces were being stored. So for my second message, that's bringing in more of a human element, a human story into that. And then a third message is giving the Prime Minister, that one person who I'm really, really trying to influence here, making sure that I really bring it home. What is the future here? So maybe my message is that all Australians should have control over their privacy and data. This is a chance for the government to act proactively. So this is just one example. So taking from this Bunnings story and going, okay, I'm a privacy advocate and I want to make sure that we get up good laws, and I'm using this particular story as an opportunity to speak in the media and get new, better laws for us. So in my media lines, I know that my goal, as a really specific goal, is to get the Prime Minister's attention. So that's what I've decided. That's the Prime Minister is the one that I'm going to influence here. And then I go through using that media line structure that's been tried and tested by me over quite a few years, is following past, present, future. Our past, our context is saying that the Australian consumer law has done a really good job in other areas. Let's learn from that. Let's use that. In message 2, we're bringing in the human element. We're bringing in why it's important and why people should care now. So bringing in the stories of Bunnings staff members and customers and people who were shocked, people who were affected. And then message 3, looking to the future. Because I know my audience is the Prime Minister, I go positive and active and say Australians should have control over their privacy and data, and this is a really good chance for the government to act. So that's just one example of taking a random story from the news and applying the media lines template to it. You can do it for any number of stories. You can do it for fun stories. You can do it for really serious topics. But I find that structure has always helped me along the way. All right. So we are coming towards the end. Feel free to put any questions in the chat that you have along the way. For anyone who's had any chat issues, I will check my emails and see if there are any other questions or queries. But feel free to pop into the chat. I will give it a minute or so. Thank you to everyone who's joined throughout the webinar. It's been very nice to have your company. All right. No questions in the chat or other platforms. So I will say thank you very much for joining for the How to Be a Media Spokesperson webinar. I do media training from all of these years where I've been broadcasting and being a media spokesperson myself. I've got some courses coming up in Melbourne in December for scientists and researchers on Tuesday, the 3rd of December, policy experts and campaigners on Wednesday, the 4th of December, and then a general how to be a media spokesperson, just like this training, but practical, where we actually get you on camera. We actually teach you how to do it face-to-face. You get individual feedback along the way in these training sessions. So these are all small group sessions that help you to practice the skills. And I'm, Black Friday, I'm calling it Comms Friday. I'm doing a 50% off offer for all of these Melbourne courses. Just use Comms Friday at the checkout. But otherwise, I do tailored media training sessions in Melbourne and in other cities across Australia. Happy to work with any good causes. I particularly love anything nerdy. If you are a person who's passionate about a really specific topic and you wonder, how can I make the public care about this? I love working with subject matter experts, people who are experts in a really specific field. I love to bring out the best in you. So please, please, please do get in touch. You can speak to me on LinkedIn. You can email me comms@jbau.com.au. Come along to one of these events. I will give a last chance for any other comments or anything in the chat. But apart from that, we'll give it a minute or so more. Another note, just a huge thank you to my former colleagues again for this mug of me on the Today Show. What a really wonderful, what a really, really wonderful gift. Oh, I do have a question on email. Thank you, Sue Lannon. So Sue has asked, how did I handle the situation on the Today Show with Carl? So this was the actual situation on the mug. So this was interesting. I would say, actually, first of all, so Carl Stefanovic is known for being a bit chaotic, but he's really good at helping people feel comfortable before they're on air. So he was always really friendly before getting into the situation, before the cameras turned on and everything went on. But he always settled you down and was nice to you and made you feel comfortable before you get on. Then when Carl started spilling coffee everywhere and breaking the machines and doing all of that, I think for me, what made me feel comfortable in that environment and able to deal with it was I did know my content. I knew what I wanted to get across, which was I was just trying to encourage people to look at Choice's coffee reviews. That was the point of doing the interview. I had a really clear goal. So I guess Carl going around breaking the machines and having fun, what mattered to me was that the audience was having fun and that they would see my organization as a fun organization, willing to go along for the ride. And so I still slipped in facts about, the coffee machines. I still slipped in our reviews about which coffee came up best on the taste scores. But I just had to recognize that this is meant to be fun. This is particularly because it was commercial television as well. They want to entertain their audience. I had to be part of that entertainment. So in between Carl breaking the machines and spilling coffee everywhere, I just made sure that I kept my cool and laughed and had fun and just made sure to get those facts and figures out along the way. So I had a few memorized along the way. I knew what I needed to get across. One of the tips and tricks I did use whenever I was doing anything on live TV with props, like reviews of machines or anything like that, was using little post-it notes that wasn't available or visible to the viewer, putting those on the backs of each of the machines so that if I needed to, I could very quickly look at the coffee machine and go, this was the coffee machine that got 85% on our test. And the audience would never know that I was just quickly looking at a post-it note that said 85%. If you do use any notes to help you along the way, you've got to be good at hiding them and make sure that they're not too obvious and keep it simple. Absolutely keep it simple. But that was an example where I was well prepped. I knew Carl was going to have fun. I didn't know he was going to have that much fun. But I just stuck to my guns and made sure, what do I want the audience to know? I want them to know that our coffee machine reviews are great and you should go have a read. So really, I just wanted to get them to our website. I wanted them to have fun and I wanted them to see our organization as a good, fun organization. All right. Thank you, Sue, for that question over email. And thank you, CPRC, for jumping in. I hope you have gotten something out of this webinar. I really appreciate your time. I know in the middle of the day, it can be a lot to carve time out, but I really want to thank you for coming along. Please do get in touch if there's anything I can do to help you with media training, with broader comms support. I've worked across lots of different nonprofits and causes, and lots of different types of comms and media. So please do get in touch. I love to be able to help. We will leave it there. Thank you so much. And I will see you next time.